Are you ready to roll the dice and see if you got what it takes to become a programmer? Well then, join me, Lesson 1, Rolling Dice, and I'll show you how to write this game right here. You'll learn about text, input, output, variables, methods, if statements, for loops, while loops, and how to create random numbers.
Alright, after you've downloaded and installed Visual Studio 2022, we can create a project. We can create a project right here, or if this window gets closed, you can go to File, New, Project. Alright, we're going to create a console application in C#. And I'm going to name my project Rolling Dice. And I'm going to name the solution Simple Games. I'll click Next. Alright, now this is very important. Here it says, do not use top-level statements. So if you don't check this check mark, Visual Studio will hide the main method and the program class from you. And you won't really have a good of understanding of what's going on. So go ahead and check this checkbox, that way you'll have a main method and your project will look like mine. So let's click Create. Alright, so over here on the right you can see here's my solution, Simple Games, and here is my one project, Rolling Dice. A solution can have multiple projects, so we just have one project for now. So we created this console application, and Visual Studio will automatically create this file called program.cs, and in this file there's a class called program, and program begins at this left curly bracket and ends at this right curly bracket. And inside a program there's this method called the main method, and this method starts at this curly bracket and ends at that curly bracket. This method is very important because this is your entry point. This is where your code begins and ends. So first thing I'm going to do is delete this hello world program, and I'm going to show you the console window because we created a console application, and if you don't know what that is this little black window right here, and this window can output text and it can consume text. And in C# we have a class called console, and this class will allow you to manipulate that window. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to press the dot or the period, and Visual Studio will give you a list of all the methods and properties that this console class has to offer. And if you notice, the methods are represented by this purple cube, and the properties are represented by this black gear. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to set the title of the console window. So I'm going to pick the title property, and I'm going to set it to the value Rolling Dice. And I'm going to end each statement, each block, I'm going to end each line of code with a semicolon. So here, title takes a string, and we're providing what's called a literal string, which is just text in quotes. The next thing I'm going to do is just output some text to the window. So we're going to go ahead and use the console class again. This time we're going to use a method, the WriteLine method. And methods are different than properties because with methods you use parentheses and you pass in the value you want in between the parentheses. So here we're going to pass in a string, another literal string, and I'm just going to say hello. And don't forget your semicolon. Alright, now let's go ahead and try this program real quick. Alright, so here the program has already ended. So we did set the title, but it reverted back because the program has ended right here. But we do see our hello text that was printed out. So let's go ahead and keep the program from ending by using this readLine method in the console class. This method will hold up processing until the user hits the enter button. So let's go ahead and give it a try. So now you can see my title is set. We outputted the text hello, and now we're waiting for a carriage return. We're waiting for the user to press the enter button. And so I'll go ahead and press enter, and the program ends. Now I want to show you how we can capture any text that the user inputs. And we can do that with this readLine method because it actually returns a value. It returns whatever text the user typed. So let's go ahead and before we say hello, let's go ahead and use the readLine method. And so now we need some place to store the value of whatever the readLine method returns. So in programming, we use variables to store data. And there's different types of variables. There's variables for storing text, and there's variables for storing numbers and different types of numbers. So the first one I'm going to show you is string, which is for storing text. I'm just going to call it X for now. So your variable, all variables need a name, and you choose the name. The name can be whatever you want, as long as it doesn't intersect with any keywords in the programming language. And there are also certain restrictions, like you can't start with a number or use special characters. You can use an underscore. Alright, so let's go ahead and output our variable X so the user can see it. Let's go ahead and give it a try. So here if we type in some text and then press the enter button, you can see there's our hello text, and we outputted what the user entered. So we were able to capture this and store it in our variable X. Now, since variable names can be anything we want, we should probably pick a name that's more meaningful. And I was planning on storing the user's name, so why don't we first output a line telling the user to enter their name. And so since we're going to be storing their name, I could call this variable name, and that'd be way better than X. But I think we can do better than that. I think we can, how about player name? I think that's an even better name. And Visual Studio has these tools to help you rename stuff. So if I click here, it'll give me this option to rename X to player name, and I'll go ahead and do that. Alright. So nothing's changed in this code except for me outputting to the screen for the user to enter their name. But it's still going to behave the same. We just changed the variable name. So let's go ahead and enter a name, and we can see, and I'll put it the text again. Now let's see if we can get the user typing on the same line here and have it say hello on the same line. So in order to do that, we don't want a carriage return after this line right here, but right line always ends with a carriage return. However, there is another method in the console class called write that doesn't end in a carriage return, so we can just use that method. And the same thing for hello, we can just use that method right here. So these two strings will be on the same line, and these two strings will be on the same line. So let's go ahead and try it. So we'll go ahead and enter a name, and see we're typing on the same line, and then we say hello on the same line. Now notice that hello and Jim are smashed together. There's no space between it. Well, because we did see we have a space here before the user types, but when we say hello, there's no space. So you can go ahead and put a space after hello. So now type name. There. Alright, the next thing I'm going to show you is how we're going to draw the dice. And maybe you're wondering, how are we going to draw the dice? We only have text. Well, back in the 80s, you had games that were completely text-based. So we're going to use the right line method to draw the dice, like so. Alright, so let's go ahead and see what it looks like. Alright, not bad. Okay, so let's draw the other dice. Hopefully you know how to cut and paste. Alright, here we go, all 6 sides of our dice. Okay, not bad. Now, throughout this program, we're going to be drawing the sides of the dice a bunch of times. So let's say if we wanted to draw this particular side of the dice, we could, of course we could cut and paste it every time we wanted to use it, but that's a little bit tedious and the code will get really long and difficult to read. So what we can do is we can take this code right here and we can put it in a method. So rather than cutting and pasting this code every time we need it, we can just call the method. So just like we have our main method here, we're going to create our own method. So let's go ahead and collapse this, and now we can put the method. It can be either before the main method or after the main method. It just needs to be inside of this class. So I'm going to put it after the main method, and it needs to be static because we're calling the main method is static, and we're going to be calling the method from a static method, so it needs to be static. The return type is void, which means there's not going to be a return type, or we're not returning anything. And the next part is the name of the function. So I'm going to call this draw number 1. And we give it some parentheses, and then we give it the curly brackets. So now we put our code in between the curly brackets. So let's go get the code to draw the number 1 side. I'll go ahead and place it in this method here. So now every time we want to draw that side 1 of the dice, we just call this one method here. So you just give it the name and then make sure to end it with a semicolon. So let's go ahead and take a look. Nothing should have changed. Right. So let's go ahead and put the rest of our dice in methods.
You might also hear people refer refer to methods as functions or subroutines. In the C language, they're called functions. And in other languages like BASIC and Fortran, they're called subroutines. In Java and C#, we call them methods.
Okay, so now we got all 6 sides and methods. So let's go ahead and test each one. Make sure it works. Okay, great. All 6 sides and methods are working. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is how to create random numbers. But first, I'm going to go ahead and comment out this code. And you can create a comment by using 2 front slashes. For example, I could put a comment here. Now this comment is only for humans, and when the compiler sees this comment, it'll skip it. And here we've commented out the code, so the compiler will assume this is comments and skip this code. And just to confirm that, we'll go ahead and run it. No dice. Alright, so in order to create random numbers in C#, there's a class called random. And if you press the dot operator on random, you can see that we don't really have any static methods or properties. That's because we need to create an instance of the random class. So I'm going to call my instance rand, and we use the equals operator and the new keyword, and then we call the constructor, which is a special type of method that creates a new instance of the random class. So now when we say rand and press the dot operator, we get a list of all these methods now. So we're going to be using the next method, which returns a random number, but there's 2 overloads to that method. And the first one takes a max value, and the second one takes a min and a max value, and that's just what we need. So our min value would be 1, and our max value would be 6. So now this will return a random number between 1 and 6, an integer type variable between 1 and 6. So now we need something to store that in. So let's go ahead and create an integer, and I could call it D for dice, or maybe I could call it dice, or how about dice side. And let's go ahead and take dice side and give it the value of the next method, which will return a value between 1 and 6. Let's go ahead and output that to the screen so we can take a look, make sure it works. Alright, so there's my random number, 3. So now that we got our random number, we can create an if statement. You give it a condition between the parentheses. So we could say if dice side equals 1, then do something. So if this condition here is true, then we will execute whatever code is in between the curly brackets. If this condition is false, then we will skip that code. So notice here that we have equals equals, and that's different than equals. This single equals is not the equals that we think about in algebra. This is an assignment equals. So here we're saying dice side gets the value of whatever's on the right. So a good way to remember that is to say gets instead of equals. Here the equals equals, we're asking the question, is dice side equal to 1? Alright, so if it is equal to 1, of course we want to draw the number 1 side. And now we can do that for each side of the dice. Alright, so now we got all our methods in our if statements. Let's go ahead and delete that code. And let's go ahead and give it a try and make sure it works. Alright, so that time we got 4, and it drew the number 4 side. Run it again, just to double check. And that time we got 2. Great. So now what we can do is we can take all of this code right here, and we can put this code inside of a method. So let's go ahead and do that. So here, after the main method, let's go ahead and create another method. It's going to be void, it's not going to return anything. And then I'm going to call it draw dice. And there's some curly brackets, so let's go ahead and grab this code. So notice here that Visual Studio says that dice side doesn't exist. Well, that's because dice side only exists in the main method. Therefore, none of the other methods in our program know about any of the variables that exist in the main method. And it actually goes further than that. If you declare a variable inside of an if statement or a for loop or inside of just curly brackets, it only exists inside of those curly brackets. However, I can pass a copy of the variables I need in my function by simply declaring them in between the parentheses. So now these two integers here, these two variables right here, have the same name, but they're not the same. This is just going to be a copy of it. And for example, if I change this name, if I change this to dice 1 side, that doesn't matter because these are different variables. So I changed the name just to prove that point. So now let's call draw dice, and then we're going to pass our dice 1 side to it. So let's go ahead and give it a try. And see, everything still functions as it always has. So everything's still working. So now that we've put all this functionality in this one method, let's go ahead and create another dice. So I'll go ahead and just copy this code right here, paste it. Now of course we can't have two variables with the same name, because how would the compiler know the difference between them? So that would, cause. So let's go ahead and change that to ran2 and this one to dice 2 side. And now if we want to draw that dice, we just call our method that we created, draw dice, and we pass dice 2 side. Semicolon. Alright, so now you can see now we have 2 dice. So now we could easily have as many dice as we wanted and draw them very easily. Alright, the next thing I'm going to show you is how to create a loop. Now in programming, if we want to do something over and over again, we can just put it inside of a loop, and we can do it as many times as we want. So the first type of loop I'm going to show you is a for loop. And so if I just type here for, and then in Visual Studio, if I hit the tab button twice real quick, it'll give me the syntax for a for loop. So I'm going to come here and change the length to 5 here. So here, this for loop has 3 parts separated by semicolons here. And this first part right here, we declare an integer I. I stands for index, which is traditional for loops. We'll learn about indexes when we get to arrays. So we initially set I equal to 0 in this first part. So in the second part right here, we're saying keep looping as long as I is less than 5. And then over here on this third part of the loop, we're saying increment I every time through the loop by 1. So anything in between these curly brackets will be executed 5 times. So let's output I so you can get a better understanding of what's going on here. Alright, let's run it. So after we printed out our dice, you can see here's I from our for loop. We can see it initially starts at 0, and it increments by 1 each time through the loop until we get to 4, or actually until I is equal to 5. And then when I is equal to 5, it says, is 5 less than 5? And it's not, so then the loop stops. So that's why we end at 4. But we notice we loop 5 times through the loop if we include 0. So now let's take our dice and put them in the loop. Now if we run it, our pair of dice will be printed out 5 times. And notice that it's the same pair of dice each time. That's because we're not calling the next method inside of the for loop. So we get the same random sides every time. So in order to fix that, let's just grab these 2 lines of code here, put them inside the loop. Let's grab these 2 lines of code, put them inside the loop. Of course, they need to be before we draw the dice. Order matters when you're programming. Alright, now we loop through the 5 times. And each time we get a different pair of dice. And so if we wanted to do this 10 times, we could just change this number to 10. And now we'll get the dice rolled 10 times. Alright, so now we're ready to turn this into a game. And how will I turn it into a game, you might ask? Easy, I'll just add money. So I'm going to create an integer, and I could call it M for money, or I could just call it money. And then I'm going to set it initially equal to 100 for $100. Now notice I did this all in one line. That's the same as if I declared the variable money and then I assigned it to the value 100. I'm just doing it in one line, and that's perfectly okay. So here at the beginning of our for loop, I'm going to say money gets the value of whatever money was minus 10. So here, each time through the loop, money will be subtracted by 10. So essentially, it costs $10 to roll the dice. And I'm going to go ahead and print out the money so that the user can see their money. I'll go ahead and put a label on that so the user knows that is their money and not just some number. Use the right method to keep this all in one line. So here I'll give it a literal string, money. Okay, so now if we run it, we'll be able to see our money diminish each time we roll the dice. Okay, great. So we rolled it 10 times, and now we have $0. Working perfect. Now, in order to make this a fun game, we need to make a way for the user to win some money. So let's go ahead and use an if statement, and I'm going to make this real simple. I'm just going to say if dice one side is equal to dice two side, then we win some money. So I'm going to say money equals whatever money was plus 50. And then I'll let the user know that they won. Alright, and let's give it a try. Alright, looks like we won a couple times. We'll give it one more try. Alright, so our user's not losing any money. So I think our payout's too high. So let's go ahead and reduce the payout so our casino doesn't go bankrupt. Let's change it to 30. And I'm going to go ahead and roll the dice 100 times to make sure that the odds are in favor of the house. Alright, here, negative 500, looking good. So let's run it 1,000 times just to make sure. Alright, here we are, $4,000 in debt. We have a successful casino. Alright, so the next feature that we're going to add, well actually first, the next thing I'm going to show you is how to create a while loop. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this for and change it to a while. I'm going to use the keyword while and then parentheses, and this is similar to an if statement. We put a condition inside of the if statement, and if that condition is true, let's use the keyword true to make it always true. So if this condition is true, we'll always loop, or if it's true, we will continue looping, and if it's false, we will stop looping. So right here I've set it to true, so it's always true. So here we have created an infinite loop, and let's go ahead and try that. Alright, so I've created an infinite loop, and this program will continue to run forever and ever until something from the outside stops the program. And here we can see we're about $70,000 in debt, and I'm going to go ahead and kill the program. Alright. So I think a good condition for our dice here would be to say keep looping while money is greater than negative 5,000. So now our gambler has a line of credit of $5,000. So let's go ahead and give that a try. Alright, so here we are, $5,000 in debt, and we're being kicked out of the casino because now we have no more credit. Alright, so the next feature that I'm going to add is I'm going to allow the user to choose if they want to roll the dice each time. So after this if statement, I'm going to output some text to the user asking if they want to play again. And let's keep this all in one line. Alright, and then we need to capture the response from the user, so I'm going to need another string, and I'm going to call this one play again. That is going to get the value from the console.readline method. And now we can say if play again equals the literal string no, then do something. So basically if the user types in no in all lowercase, because this is case sensitive, then we will jump into this if statement. And here I'm going to use the keyword break, and break will break out of any loop. So as soon as we hit this line of code right here, we'll go from this line of code to outside of the loop right here, and basically end the program. So let's go ahead and try that and make sure it works. Alright, play again, and as long as I don't type no, it will keep looping. So it doesn't matter what I type as long as it's not lowercase no. See, it's case sensitive. If the uppercase doesn't work, it has to be lowercase because it's case sensitive. So if I type no all lowercase, we're out of the loop, and now we're done with the program. Alright, and we're done.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. Hey, that's not the game you were playing at the beginning of the video. Yeah, that's right. I wanted to keep the video under 40 minutes. So if you want to learn how to make the game where it doesn't scroll, that's in another video. You know, sometimes when I show people the video games that I've written, they tell me stuff like this. You should let me think of the games, and you can write them.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, and I tell them, I didn't spend half my life learning how to program so I could write someone else's dumbass idea of a video game.